an interesting story. Well, I know your folks need to go, so I just got to tell you a couple other stories while we're up here. It's human interest stories that you may or may not get from your professor. I don't know if he has this page or not. Years ago, I wrote to a descendant of Cyrus Farnsworth, and I got a couple of these stories back, and I thought they were kind of interesting, so I want to share them with you. One of them had to do with William Farnsworth again. I showed you his picture. And son number 9, Eugene Farnsworth. Now remember, eventually they're going to have 22 kids. They haven't had that many yet, but this is son number 9. He's old enough. So that one night, in the middle of the night, William Farnsworth comes to Eugene, shakes him to waken him, and says to him, get up, wake up, get up. And Eugene didn't want to get up. He was not in any mood to get up. And why do I need to get up? Well, mother is about to have another baby. You need to go to Marlow to get the doctor. By this time, Eugene is quite awake. And he said, well, he didn't want to go because, well, why don't you want to go? His father wanted. You know, mother is about to have a baby. Why don't you want to go? Well, there's already too many children in this family. We don't need another one. Well, William Farnsworth said, remember, son, it says, increase and multiply and replenish the earth. By this time, Eugene is fully awake. And according to the family story, he said to his father, but God didn't expect you to do it all by yourself. If they don't believe these are real people, let's see what else we can tell you. Well, they used to have testimony services here in the early days, or social services. And because we didn't have ministers, William Farnsworth, Frederick Wheeler himself was invited, doubly urged by James White to move west to do evangelism, so he moved out to New York State, near where Ira Medicine lived, not too far away. And so once he did, this congregation kind of lost its spiritual moorings, but to keep things going, they would have testimony services because they didn't have regular meetings, so people would come and testify. And they were called social services or testimony meetings. Well, Cyrus Farnsworth one week was conducting a meeting when a man by the name of Wooster Ball, here he is, Wooster Ball began to testify. And he kept going, and he kept going. And finally, Cyrus said, Wooster, you've testified long enough. Let someone else give their testimony. But Wooster went right on. Cyrus let him go on a little while longer, and then firmly said to him, Wooster, I say, sit down. Well, Wooster didn't. He hesitated a second and then started his testimony again. Went right on. So Cyrus went around, stood in front of the pew, right in front of Wooster, put both hands on his shoulders and said, Wooster, I told you to sit down. Now, I don't know how you picture early meetings, but that's the story. So Wooster at that point blinked, and with the substantial assist of the head elder, he gave way, and the meeting proceeded. Now, Wooster Ball, another one about Wooster Ball. One Sabbath, in a testimony meeting, another one of these meetings, he was belaboring the feminine members for their immodesty in dress. So, after he had done that, I don't have a good picture of him, but this guy, Hosey Dodge, looks like Hosea, but it's Hosey Dodge. Hosey Dodge, when Wooster finally had finished putting the ladies down for their immodesty in dress, Hosey Dodge spoke up and said, Wooster, have you never read where it says, thou shalt not rebuke the daughter of my people? Well, the next Sabbath, Wooster came back to Brother Dodge here at church and said, during the last week, I've gone all through my Bible, and I cannot find the text that says not to rebuke the daughter of my people. Hosey got a twinkle in his eye and said, I never said it was in the Bible, I just asked you if you'd read it. Wooster was an interesting fellow. I was reading a bunch of Farnsworth letters one time, and they started this new school called South Lancaster Academy, later Lancaster College. And would you know, some of the people sent their students, the young people here, down to SLA, South Lancaster Academy. And they came back with some of the strangest, as far as Wooster was concerned, strangest, weirdest idea. And Wooster would go off about this modernization, this liberal education these students were getting at SLA. What was it that was setting them off? They were teaching them down there to eat with a fork. Everybody knows You eat with a knife. You don't eat with a fork. And he was settled. I mean, the guy had a lot of strange ideas. But there were some interesting people in this church. Now, 2 more stories, and I will get through. Got to tell them here because they happen here. And one of them is the winter. Actually, I'm sorry. I hope the suit stays warm where you're going, you guys. I've got to tell you one other that happened here with Eugene Farnsworth. Son number 9. You've all heard of Jane Andrews. He showed up one day up here. Elder Andrews was a scholar. He was not a farmer. He was a scholar. And he found Eugene out in the field working. And he picked up a hoe. And Eugene would later recall it was obvious he didn't know even which end of the hoe to use. But Elder Andrews was after a soul. And if he needed a little, a visual aid to help him, that's fine. So anyway, he walks down there silently trying to hoe along as Eugene was hoeing. And finally, they get to the end of the row and they start talking, and he says, what is your real purpose in life? He said he didn't criticize that I wasn't in school, and he just said, what's your purpose? What are you going to do in life? Later, Elder Farnsworth would say, I like this frank way of speaking. I said, Elder Andrews, I'm going to be a lawyer. Well, sir, he said, you might do a great deal worse. I want you to think of the wisdom of that reply, Elder Farnsworth would later write. If he'd come up with something directly against my plans, my opposition would have been up. But he continued, what are you going to do before you are a lawyer? Well, I said, I'm going to school. By the way, he'd only had about 3 months of formal schooling at that time in his life, he would later say. I'm going to go to school and get an education. Well, what will you do then? Elder Andrews asked. I'm going to study law. Yes, and then what next, he said. Well, I said, I hope to have a practice. And what next? Well, I hope to earn some money and get a competency and get a home and have a family. Yes, and what next? He said, I began to grow nervous. I didn't like the way he was crowding me into the corner, for I saw that's what he was doing. So I said, I suppose I'll grow old like everybody else. And he said, what next? Well, I said, I suppose I'll die. And Elder Andrews said, and what next? Elder Farnsworth, telling the story years later, said, I tell you, that great good man had driven me to the end of my chain. Those words stuck in my memory. Then with his great blue eyes looking straight through me, he said, my boy, and I would say to the young people here, my boy, my girl, you take hold of something that will help you to span the chasm, something that will land your feet safely on the other side, where you will be safe for eternity. These are the kind of people that came through this place. Let's talk about 2 other incidents that I think at least move me when I think about them. One of them happened in the winter of 68 or 69, I guess it probably doesn't make much difference. Elder Wheeler had left, as I mentioned, and had moved away, and this church was not in very good spiritual condition. In fact, they had pretty well stopped having services, and they would sometimes meet over in Cyrus Farnsworth's home, but they didn't do very much in terms of meeting here in this building very often, especially not in the winter months, but sometimes they would even then. James and Ellen White came through on a preaching trip, and when they came through, you kids might be interested in this. This is all back before you had all this, the easy communication now that you've got. So how did they announce when they were going to go someplace and be somewhere? On the back page of the review, they would put a column. On such and such a weekend, Elder so-and-so is going to be in such and such a place. And on such and such he'll be so-and-so. So there was a notice that was put there that on such and such a day, Christmas week, James and Ellen White and Jane Andrews were going to be here in Washington, New Hampshire. And I can imagine when somebody saw that, they scurried around to try to get the church all cleaned up. Now, interesting about those notes, Jay and Andrews, who we already mentioned, Jay and Andrews once said that if there's one thing that God doesn't know about the future, it's where James White's really going to be on any given Sabbath. He might announce he'll be there, but who knows where he's going to end up. So anyway, they would tease each other back and forth. So here they are with this announcement, and James and Ellen White are coming to Washington, New Hampshire. They held a meeting. There are differences of opinion as to where that meeting was held. Some have it that it was held here in the church. It was probably more likely held in Cyrus Farnsworth's house, but because we're in the church, and since some say it was here, let's just pretend it was in the church for this occasion. All right, so what did they do on Monday morning? Christmas Day is going to be Wednesday morning. This is Monday morning, 2 days before Christmas. Ellen White did something on this occasion that we only have records of her doing 2 or 3 times in her experience, but under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, she began to look around this packed building and point out individuals and their sins and mistakes. I have been shown. And then she would say what she'd been shown about this person. And I've been shown. Now, let's be totally honest, young and old, at this point. What would you think most people were probably doing? I'm guessing that if they were sitting like this before, they were probably like this before very long, because not all of them were condemning. Some of them were encouragement. People have been talking behind your back, and they've been saying this or that, and I've been shown that what they're saying about you is not true. But she was also appealing to people to give up this, to give up that. Whatever it was that God had shown her, they needed to change in their life. Seated in this room, if that's where the meeting was, but seated in the congregation that day was Eugene Farnsworth, son number 9, who I have already showed you the picture of. And he's thinking to himself, if Ellen White is for real, now you see he didn't become a Sabbath keeper, but he had not yet accepted the visions of Ellen White. He said to himself, if Ellen White is what she claims to be, she will rebuke my father, William Farnsworth. Now, what did Eugene know about his father? He knew that his father had started to use tobacco, chewing tobacco. Eugene knew it because when they were out working in the woods in the snow, he was working behind his father. He would see where his father had spit into the snow and then covered it over with his boot, trying to keep the son from knowing that the father was using chewing tobacco, since he'd given up, supposedly, when he was a member of the church. So Eugene thought to himself, if she's for real, she will rebuke my father. And almost as soon as that thought went through his mind, Ellen White turned to William Farnsworth. And the reason I wanted this here is because the only place I know where anybody sat in this building is where William Farnsworth used to sit. So I like to think it was here. She turned to William Farnsworth, who sat right there. You're halfway in Farnsworth's seat. Right there. William Farnsworth used to sit. And she said, I have been shown that you are using nicotine. Now, you promised that you were not going to use it, but you are using it. And there are people here that know you're using it. Now, what do you think was going through Eugene's mind at that point? I don't think the spirit of prophecy is very relevant. Of course not. I don't think she knows what she's talking about. No, of course not. Why? Because as a teenager, he put the gift to a test, and he knew that it was sound, because he knew what his father was that his father was acting a lie, and that God had shown Ellen White what his father was doing. Elder Farnsworth Eugene Farnsworth would go on to become a minister. Throughout his life, he died in the 1930s, throughout his long life, and could not shake his confidence in the gift of prophecy. Why? Because as a teenager, he had tried it and found out that it was solid, and it was something you could count on and rely on. That's one story that happened here. I should go on and tell you that on Wednesday, now there was a big revival that happened, by the way, at that meeting. Big revival. A number of people acknowledged they had been wrong. They cheated each other in this church. Some of the people were farmers, and they would give you a little bit less weight for a peck of potatoes or whatever. I mean, there was that kind of stuff that had to be straightened out, and other things. On Wednesday, James and Ellen White were still here, Christmas Day. They decided it's time now to work for the young people of this church. I'm going to say this now to the adults in this church and in this meeting. I think that one way to start saving our young people is for us to be consistent in our own lives. And James and Ellen White knew they could do nothing for the young people in terms of revival and reformation until they had revival and reformation in the lives of the adults of this church. And once they had broken down, and for that meeting went on for about 5 or 6 hours, by the way, on Monday. And once there was that confession and that repentance and that breaking down, then it was time to make appeals to the young people. And so on Christmas Day, they appealed. 13 young people gave their heart to the Lord that day. 5 who were not there within the next few days gave their heart to the Lord. So 18 young people out of this congregation gave their heart to the Lord. 12 of those young people wanted to be baptized right then. And so they went over here to Mill and Pond, right out there in front of Cyrus Farnsworth's house, chopped a hole in the ice, and had a baptism service. Sometimes people, I know where you see, that was 12 of the 18. 6 of them waited until the spring. I've just got the first candidate for the spring baptism. I would be number 2 in the spring baptism, I'll tell you. Sometimes people ask me when we're over there at Cyrus Farnsworth's house, well, where was the baptism? I mean, how would I know? I have no idea where the baptism was. So I just use common sense. I say, if you look at the edge of the lake and the front door of Cyrus Farnsworth's house, probably that straight line will show you where the baptism was. I don't think they stayed out there any longer than they had to before the baptism.
And hey everybody, this is Geocacher TN Photobug. I want to show you a really cool picture before I close off this video. The photo you are now viewing is a photo of a cemetery that is actually right next to the Washington, New Hampshire church, even though you can't see it in this shot. But I found out later afterwards that several of the Adventist pioneers, the people that Elder Nix mentioned in the stories that were featured on this video, are actually buried here. There's Wooster Ball, there's William Farnsworth, Daniel Farnsworth, and Hosea Dodge, among other people who are buried here. But I thought that was really neat, and I thought you guys might like to see this picture and know where they were buried too. But thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I certainly enjoyed hearing all the funny and amusing stories Elder Nix had to share about our Adventist pioneers. Certainly, they're not as boring as you might have first thought from their pictures. But also, I really liked the very touching Christmas story that he shared with us there as well. So yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Be sure to check out all of my other videos at my YouTube channel. That's www.youtube.com/tnphotobug. And until next time, this is Geocacher TN Photobug signing out. I'm indeed having a blast of the past.